I don't remember deciding to descend. That's the part that still keeps me awake. Not the screaming. Not the thing I saw in seat 27A. Not even the report I was forced to sign afterward. I remember my hands on the controls. I remember maintaining flight level 390 over the Northern Rockies. I remember my first officer reading back a routine frequency change. Then, the aircraft dropped. Exactly 3,000 feet. Not because of turbulence. Not because of mechanical failure. Because the autopilot accepted a descent clearance that no air traffic controller ever gave. By the time I realized what had happened, we'd already entered airspace that doesn't exist on any civilian chart. If you've ever booked a ticket with REDACTED Airlines, I need you to listen carefully. If your boarding pass ever lists a gate that wasn't displayed on the airport monitors 5 minutes earlier, don't board. I don't care how much money you've spent. I don't care who's waiting for you. Walk away. Because if Flight 702 is waiting at the end of that jet bridge, you're already too late. My name isn't important. The airline made sure of that. Every public record that tied me to commercial aviation disappeared almost overnight. My pilot certificates are gone. Employment history? Gone. Medical records? Gone. It's as if I never flew an airplane in my life. But I did. For 12 years. Nearly 9,000 flight hours. Former Air Force. Commercial airline captain. No accidents. No violations. No failed check rides. I believed in procedures because procedures keep people alive. Every checklist exists because someone died before it was written. That's what I used to tell new first officers. Then I joined REDACTED Airlines. Officially, they didn't exist. You couldn't buy tickets directly from them. You never saw commercials. Their airplanes never appeared in travel magazines. Most passengers thought they were flying under ordinary code-share agreements with larger carriers. The aircraft wore different paint depending on the airport. Different logos. Different flight numbers. Different paperwork. But every pilot knew. You didn't say the company's real name over the radio. You never asked why payroll came from shell corporations. You never questioned why every employment contract ended with 12 pages covered in black bars where entire paragraphs had been redacted. The money was incredible. Nearly double what major airlines paid. Schedules were flexible. Medical coverage was unbelievable. If you asked why, management smiled. If you're here, Captain, you've already passed the part that matters. Nobody ever explained what that meant. I figured it was another government contract. Maybe prisoner transport. Military logistics. Something classified. It wasn't uncommon for former military pilots to end up flying unusual assignments. So I ignored the strange parts. At first. Training lasted only 4 days. That should have been my first warning. Learning a new aircraft normally takes weeks. Instead, we spent almost no time discussing systems. No engine failures. No hydraulic emergencies. No electrical faults. No decompression procedures. Instead, they handed us a thin gray binder. No company logo. No publication number. Just a title. Operational exceptions. The instructor stood at the front of the classroom. He never smiled. Never introduced himself. Never even told us his name. He simply opened the binder. You already know how to fly airplanes. What we're teaching you is how to survive this one. Everyone laughed. He didn't. He waited. Then continued. If Rule 7 is ever broken, there won't be enough left to investigate. Nobody laughed again. The rules sounded ridiculous. Rule 1. Never acknowledge an unexpected passenger after the cabin door is secured. Manifest discrepancies belong to operations, not the flight crew. Rule 2. If air traffic control repeats your call sign twice without waiting for acknowledgement, respond only after the third transmission. Rule 3. Cabin lights must never remain fully dark above 31,000 feet. even if electrical failures require emergency lighting. Rule 4. If the weather radar displays a perfect circular storm with an empty center, alter course immediately. Do not request permission. Do not explain. Rule 5. If a child knocks on the cockpit door during cruise, maintain present heading. Do not answer. Do not ask questions. There are no children authorized outside their seats during cruise. Rule 6. If every passenger on the cabin camera appears asleep simultaneously, wake at least one. Immediately. No matter how. Rule 7. The instructor stopped talking. Close the binder. Look directly at every pilot in the room. If Rule 7 becomes relevant, you have already failed. Someone finally raised a hand. What is Rule 7? The instructor stared at him for several seconds, then quietly replied, I hope you never find out. Training moved on. Nobody asked again. I wish I had. My first 6 months were normal. Mostly. The routes changed constantly. Chicago, Denver, Seattle, Atlanta, Boston, Anchorage. Sometimes airports I'd never heard of. Sometimes military fields that didn't appear on public aviation maps. Passengers rarely spoke. Most slept. Some stared straight ahead for entire flights. No headphones. No phones. No books. Nothing. Flight attendants joked about it. Easiest passengers in the industry. But there were little things. Things that didn't fit. One flight left Denver with 168 passengers. We landed with 167. No emergency. No diversion. No record of anyone leaving. Ground crews insisted the manifest had always listed 167. Even though all 4 of us remembered boarding one extra man in a gray suit. Security footage disappeared. Operations blamed a paperwork error. The next week, the first officer who mentioned him resigned. Or so they said. Nobody ever heard from him again. Another flight landed with a bird strike that maintenance couldn't identify. The entire nose cone looked old, weathered, as if it had been exposed to decades of corrosion in a single hour. The airplane itself was only 5 years old. Maintenance replaced it overnight. Nobody discussed it. Then there was Captain Wallace. Every airline has legends. Pilots who'd flown impossible emergencies. Wallace wasn't famous because he survived. He was famous because he refused promotions. Refused retirement. Refused vacations. He just kept flying. One evening in the crew lounge, I asked him why. He looked exhausted. Far older than the 53 years listed in the employee directory. He stirred cold coffee without drinking it. Finally, he said, You know why airline pilots point at every switch before touching it? Verification, I answered. So you don't convince yourself you did something you didn't. He nodded, then leaned closer. One day, you'll move a switch, and the airplane will remember something different. I laughed politely. He didn't. He stood, picked up his flight bag. Before leaving, he looked back one last time. When that happens, don't trust your co-pilot. I watched him disappear down the hallway. That was the last time anyone admitted seeing Captain Wallace. According to company records, he retired 3 years earlier. 3 years. The conversation had happened 2 days before. I even remembered what tie he was wearing. Blue with silver stripes. I checked the crew photographs posted outside operations. His picture wasn't there anymore. Neither was the empty space where it should have been. As if Captain Wallace had never existed. I told myself I was tired. Fatigue plays tricks on pilots. Long duty days. Changing time zones. Broken sleep. There had to be a rational explanation. There always is. At least, that's what I believed. Until the night of Flight 702. The flight every company record insists was cancelled before departure. The flight carrying 183 passengers who officially never boarded. The flight that descended into airspace no controller would admit existed. The flight where I finally learned what Rule 7 was. And by then, it was already far too late. The first thing every pilot notices about redacted airlines isn't the airplanes. It's the silence. Every airline has its own personality. Southwest crews joke with each other over the radio. Cargo pilots complain about weather. Regional crews gripe about delays. There's always chatter. Even on bad days. Not at Redacted. From the moment you entered one of their crew operations centers, people spoke in low voices. Nobody lingered after a briefing. Nobody asked unnecessary questions. You could spend an hour in a room with 20 pilots and never hear a conversation that wasn't directly related to the next flight. At first, I assumed it was professionalism. Then I realized it was fear. Not panic. Not anxiety. The kind of fear people carry after surviving something they can't explain. The kind that changes the way they look at ordinary things. Like doors. Or clocks. Or windows. 3 weeks before Flight 702, I was assigned to Denver. The email simply read, Special Operation. Aircraft, B737-900ER. Crew report, 2,100 local. Destination, withheld until departure. No explanation. No passenger list. No estimated arrival. That wasn't entirely unusual anymore. The destination field on our paperwork was often covered by a removable sticker. We wouldn't know where we were going until after boarding. The company claimed it reduced information leaks. No one believed that. When I arrived at the operations building, the dispatcher slid a sealed envelope across the counter. Captain? I reached for it. He didn't let go. His eyes met mine. Read it before you start the APU. That was all he said. He released the envelope and immediately looked away. I found an empty briefing room before opening it. Inside was another gray sheet. No company logo. No signature. Just a heading. Supplemental Operational Procedures. Below it were 6 new rules. Not amendments. Not updates. Additional rules. Rule 8. If the aircraft clock differs from your wristwatch by more than 3 minutes after engine start, use your wristwatch for all operational decisions. Never attempt to reset the aircraft clock. Rule 9. If a passenger addresses you by your first name before you've introduced yourself, terminate the conversation immediately. Do not answer any personal questions. Rule 10. If ground control instructs you to taxi to runway 9 when runway 9 does not exist at that airport, remain stopped. Set the parking brake. Wait for further instructions. Rule 11. If another aircraft reports your exact position while you can clearly see it several miles away, assume only one of you is where you believe you are. Rule 12. Never look directly into an occupied cockpit of another redacted aircraft after sunset. Wave if necessary. Do not make eye contact. Rule 13. If cabin crew report an unassigned passenger wearing the old company uniform, lock the cockpit door. Do not review security footage. Destroy any written description. At the bottom of the page was a handwritten sentence. You will never receive an explanation in time to benefit from it. No signature. No initials. Just that. I folded the paper and slipped it into my flight bag. For reasons I still don't understand. I kept every one of those rule sheets. The company searched my apartment afterward. They missed only one. The one I'm reading from now. The gate assignment that night bothered me immediately. Gate B31. Denver International Airport. Except, Denver doesn't have a B31. At least not on any terminal map. I checked twice. Then 3 times. Nothing. I called operations. The paperwork says B31. The dispatcher answered without hesitation. It will. That wasn't an answer. I've got the airport map in front of me. You won't in 15 minutes. Click. He hung up. I remember staring at my phone. Then laughing to myself. Maybe this was some elaborate company hazing ritual. Pilots are notorious practical jokers. Maybe there was a temporary gate. Construction. A remote stand. Something. I walked toward the B concourse anyway. Halfway there, I noticed something strange. People stopped walking. Not everyone. Just enough of them. Business travelers. Families. Airport employees. They'd glance toward the far end of the concourse. Pause. Blink. Then continue as though nothing had happened. Like they'd forgotten why they'd stopped. When I reached the end of the terminal, Gate B31 was there. It hadn't existed on the airport map 5 minutes earlier. Now it sat beyond Gate B30, illuminated by perfectly ordinary fluorescent lights. Passengers lined up calmly at the counter. Nobody looked confused. The gate agent smiled as if she'd worked there for years. Behind the windows sat our aircraft. White fuselage. No visible airline logo. Just a registration number I'd never seen before. And 738RX. I instinctively checked the FAA registration database on my phone. No record. The tail number didn't exist. By the time I looked back up, the registration had changed. Now it read an 814RA. I blinked. Maybe I'd misread it. Maybe fatigue. Maybe glare. I took a picture. Later, the photos showed a completely different registration. One that also didn't exist. The lead flight attendant was already aboard. Her name was Melissa. Former Navy. Calm under pressure. The type of person who could evacuate a burning airplane without raising her voice. She met me at the cockpit. Captain? You see the gate? I did. So I'm not crazy. I didn't say that. She almost smiled. Almost. Instead, she handed me a folded card. Found this in the forward galley. It looked older than the airplane. Yellowed edges. Handwritten ink. No date. No signature. Only one sentence. If they applaud after landing, don't turn around. I looked at Melissa. Very funny. I didn't write it. I know. I've never seen handwriting like that before. Neither had I. It looked uneven. Not shaky. More like someone had learned to imitate human handwriting without understanding how letters naturally connect. I slipped the card into my pocket. I should have thrown it away. Instead, I kept it. Just like every other warning. The cockpit itself looked normal. Spotless. Factory fresh. Every instrument passed inspection. Hydraulics. Fuel. Electrical. Flight management system. Everything exactly where it should be. Until I noticed the clock. 22:14. My wristwatch read 22:09. 5 minutes apart. Rule 8. If the aircraft clock differs from your wristwatch by more than 3 minutes, use your wristwatch. Never reset the aircraft clock. I frowned. Aircraft clocks drift occasionally. But 5 minutes? On a modern airliner synchronized before every flight? That wasn't normal. I reached toward the adjustment knob. Then stopped. For the first time, I obeyed one of the rules without questioning it. My first officer that night was Ethan Brooks. 36. Excellent pilot. Quiet. Methodical. The kind of co-pilot every captain hopes for. We'd flown together twice before. He entered the cockpit carrying 2 coffees. You good? Yeah. You look like you've seen a ghost. Just weird paperwork. He nodded slowly. Then said something that froze me. They gave you the extra rules too? I looked at him. You got them? Yesterday. How many? 6. So did I. He stared at the overhead panel. You ever wonder why they don't issue these electronically? No. I think paper is harder to erase. Neither of us spoke after that. Boarding began exactly on schedule. Business travelers. College students. An elderly couple. A young mother with a little girl clutching a stuffed rabbit. Nothing unusual. Except, nobody spoke above a whisper. Even the children. Airliners are noisy places before departure. Overhead bins slamming. People arguing over seat assignments. Phones ringing. Laughter. Not this flight. The cabin sounded like a church. Melissa entered the cockpit. Boarding complete. Passenger count? 183. I signed the manifest. She hesitated. There is one thing. What? She lowered her voice. Seat 27A was empty during boarding. Okay. It isn't anymore. I frowned. Late passenger? No. I never saw anyone sit down. I waited for her to smile. She didn't. You checked? Twice. You want me to ask? Rule 1 echoed inside my head. Never acknowledge an unexpected passenger after the cabin door is secured. Manifest discrepancies belong to operations. I looked at the checklist. Then at Melissa. Finally. I shook my head. No. She didn't argue. She simply nodded once. Understood. She closed the cockpit door. The lock engaged with a heavy metallic click. For reasons I couldn't explain. It sounded permanent. Outside, rain began tapping against the windshield. Except the weather report had called for clear skies. Then ground control came over the radio. Redacted 702, taxi to runway 9. I felt every muscle in my body tighten. Denver International Airport doesn't have a runway 9. Ethan slowly turned to look at me. Neither of us said a word. Then the radio repeated, exactly as we'd been warned. Redacted 702, taxi to runway 9. The airport outside the windshield was still there. But somehow, it no longer looked like the one we pushed back from. The rain vanished the moment we released the parking brake. Not faded. Not tapered off. 1 second, heavy drops hammered the windshield hard enough for the wipers to struggle. The next, the glass was perfectly dry. No streaks. No mist. Nothing. I instinctively looked toward the ramp. The concrete outside wasn't wet. Neither were the service vehicles. There wasn't a single reflection beneath the floodlights. It was as if the storm had never existed. Ethan looked at me. You saw that too? I nodded. Neither of us said another word. There wasn't anything useful to say. Professional pilots are trained to avoid confirmation bias. If one person thinks they saw something strange, the other shouldn't reinforce it without evidence. But we both knew what we'd seen. And we both knew it was impossible. Ground control called again. Redacted 702. A burst of static swallowed the rest of the transmission. Then the voice returned. Continue taxi. Different voice. Same frequency. The first controller had sounded older. Calm. Confident. The second sounded younger. Almost nervous. I pressed the transmit switch. Ground 702. Confirm assigned runway. 3 seconds passed. 5. Then, Captain. The controller didn't use our call sign. He used my title. Continue taxi. That wasn't standard phraseology. Not even close. I looked at Ethan. You catch that? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stared out the left cockpit window. What is that? I followed his gaze. About half a mile away sat another airliner. Same white fuselage. Same lack of markings. Its landing lights were on. Its anti-collision beacon flashed every second. But it wasn't moving. It simply sat at the edge of the taxiway. Waiting. Our nose swung slightly as we followed the yellow centerline. The other aircraft slowly rotated. Not by taxiing. By turning in place. Perfectly. As though someone had placed it on a giant rotating platform. Until its cockpit windows faced directly toward us. Rule 12. Never look directly into an occupied cockpit of another redacted aircraft after sunset. My eyes dropped instinctively to the taxiway centerline. Keep moving, I muttered. Ethan didn't. He kept staring. His expression changed. Confusion. Then recognition. Then absolute terror. Jesus! What? His breathing became shallow. What do you see? He didn't answer. Instead, he whispered, That's us. Every instinct told me not to look. I looked anyway. The other airplane sat perhaps 300 yards away now. Its navigation lights blinked normally. Its engines appeared shut down. Dark cockpit. Dark cabin. Except, there were two silhouettes sitting in the flight deck. One in the captain's seat. One in the first officer's seat. The captain slowly lifted a hand. He waved. Rule 12. Wave if necessary. Do not make eye contact. My hand rose almost automatically. One quick wave. Nothing more. Then I forced my eyes back to the taxiway. Behind us, I heard the other aircraft's engines begin to spool. But the sound came from directly above the cockpit. Not behind us. Above us. As if another airplane were suspended in the darkness overhead. When I looked through the windshield, the sky was empty. We reached the hold short line. Except, there wasn't a runway beyond it. There was only darkness. Not nighttime darkness. Not fog. The landing lights illuminated nothing. The pavement simply ended. Like the edge of a cliff. Ground control spoke again. Cleared for immediate departure. Ethan leaned toward the windshield. I can't see a runway. Neither can I. The radio crackled. You are experiencing a temporary visual obstruction. Temporary. Visual. Obstruction. Those words felt rehearsed. As though someone had read them from a script. I switched on the taxi lights. Nothing changed. No pavement. No centerline. Just black. An endless black surface that reflected no light. I considered rejecting the clearance. Returning to the gate. Declaring an emergency. Before I could key the microphone, the darkness moved. Not much. Just enough. Like a curtain shifting in a breeze. Then the runway lights appeared. Blue taxi lights. White centerline lights. Edge lights stretching into the distance. Perfectly normal. Had they been there the entire time? Or had something moved out of the way? I couldn't answer that. Neither could Ethan. He simply whispered, I don't think we should take off. I agreed. Every instinct I had agreed. But the radio interrupted again. 702. Static. Then, if you remain on the ground, it will reach the airport. Silence. I looked at Ethan. You heard that? He nodded slowly. That wasn't ATC. No. It sounded. He couldn't finish. Neither could I. Because deep down, I knew exactly what he meant. It hadn't sounded human. Not because of distortion. Because it spoke as though it already knew we'd obey. Melissa called from the cabin. Captain? Go ahead. Her voice trembled for the first time since I'd known her. I've got something strange. What is it? The passenger in 27 Alpha. My grip tightened around the yoke. What about them? I asked if they wanted anything before departure. And? They answered. So? Another pause. They knew my name. I closed my eyes. Did you introduce yourself? No. What exactly did they say? Silence. Long enough that I thought we'd lost the interphone connection. Then she answered. They said, Melissa, you shouldn't be here this time. A chill ran through my entire body. This time? I've never seen this passenger before. What did they look like? Another pause. She sounded confused. I don't remember. What do you mean? I was just standing there. I looked right at them. I know I did. But now, I can't remember if it was a man or a woman. She started breathing faster. I don't remember their face. I don't remember their clothes. I don't even remember walking away. Then, very quietly, they smiled. The line went dead. Before either of us could react, every cabin call light illuminated at once. 183 passenger call buttons. Every single one. The overhead panel erupted in chimes. Ding. 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 Continuous. Unbroken. Like dozens of tiny alarms competing with one another. Then, just as suddenly, they all shut off. Every light. Every chime. Complete silence. Ethan reached for the PA handset. I grabbed his wrist. No. What if something happened? What if that's what wants us to open the door? He stared at me. Then slowly lowered the handset. The departure clearance came again. This time, it wasn't over the radio. It came through both of our headsets simultaneously. Crystal clear. No static. No background noise. Just a calm voice. You are late. Neither of us had transmitted. The radio wasn't receiving. COM 1 and COM 2 both displayed blank frequencies. Yet the voice continued. There are passengers waiting. I switched both radios off. The voice didn't stop. You've delayed this flight before. My heart skipped. Before? I'd never flown Flight 702. Not according to the schedule. Not according to my logbook. Then why? Why did that sentence feel familiar? Like hearing lyrics to a song I'd forgotten years ago. Ethan suddenly grabbed my arm hard enough to hurt. Look! He pointed toward the terminal. Every airport vehicle had stopped moving. Fuel trucks. Baggage carts. Pushback tugs. Even the flashing beacons had frozen. Workers stood perfectly still. One baggage handler remained halfway up a conveyor belt. A woman pushing a wheelchair had stopped in mid-stride. Not motionless. Frozen. Like a paused video. The only thing still moving was our aircraft. And far behind us, the unmarked airplane we'd seen earlier. It had begun taxiing. Without lights. Without engine noise. And somehow, despite moving at taxi speed, it was gaining on us impossibly fast. Then the cockpit printer activated by itself. No one had sent a message. The printer chattered for several seconds before ejecting a single strip of paper. Only one line was printed. Do not let Flight 702 depart after 22:22. I looked at my wristwatch. 22:21. The aircraft clock. Still read 22:26. 5 minutes ahead. Exactly as the rule sheet had warned. Then, for the first time that night, a sound came from behind the reinforced cockpit door. Not knocking. Not footsteps. A child laughed. Softly. Followed by a gentle, innocent voice. Captain! Can I come in? Every hair on the back of my neck stood up. There were no children authorized outside their seats during taxi. And yet, someone, or something, was standing just outside the cockpit door. The little girl's voice came again. Gentle. Almost shy. Captain! My mommy said I'm supposed to stay with you. 3 soft knocks echoed through the cockpit door. Not loud enough to be alarming. Just patient. Like a child who'd been taught good manners. Ethan slowly looked toward the reinforced cockpit door. Neither of us moved. Rule 5. If a child knocks on the cockpit door during cruise, maintain present heading. Do not answer. Do not ask questions. But we weren't in cruise. We were still holding short of a runway that hadn't existed 10 minutes earlier. The rule didn't apply. Or maybe it did. That was the problem with Redacted Airlines. The rules never told you everything. They assumed you'd understand the parts they refused to write down. The knocking stopped. Then a tiny sigh drifted through the door. Okay. Small footsteps padded away down the aisle. Melissa's voice exploded over the interphone. Captain? I grabbed the handset. What happened? There isn't a child out here. My stomach dropped. What? I heard the voice too. I came forward immediately. The aisle is empty. What about the passengers? There. She hesitated. They're all facing forward. So? They weren't a second ago. A chill settled over the cockpit. What do you mean? When I walked through the cabin before pushback, people were reading, sleeping, looking out the windows. No. They're all sitting perfectly upright. Hands in their laps. Looking straight ahead. Every single one. Even the little girl with the stuffed rabbit. I exchanged a glance with Ethan. Melissa continued. They aren't blinking very much. A metallic ding interrupted her. Seatbelt sign. It had just switched off. Neither of us touched the panel. I immediately pressed the switch. Nothing happened. It remained off. I tried again. Still off. The switch itself refused to move. Like it had become part of the panel. Then, every overhead reading light turned on simultaneously. 183 tiny circles of warm white light. Every passenger illuminated. Melissa whispered, "Oh God!" "What?" They all looked up. Every muscle in my body locked. They looked up together? Yes. No. Another pause. They looked at the cockpit. The interphone crackled. Static swallowed her voice. Then, something else answered. Not Melissa. Everything is on schedule. The line went dead. The cockpit door indicator flashed. Unlocked. I hadn't touched it. The electronic lock cycled by itself. Click. 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 The handle moved about half an inch. Stopped. Moved again. Someone was testing it. Very gently. No panic. No force. Just checking. Ethan immediately hit the emergency lockdown switch. The indicator turned red. Locked. 5 seconds later. Green. Unlocked again. He hit it harder. Red. Green. Red. Green. The airplane wasn't obeying us anymore. It was making its own decisions. Then the electronic flight bag mounted beside my seat lit up. A new document appeared. No sender. No notification. Just a PDF titled Flight 702, Incident History. There were dozens of entries. Every one had the same flight number. Different years. Different aircraft. Different captains. Some aircraft hadn't even existed in those decades. One report listed a Boeing 737 MAX in 1973. Impossible. Another described an Airbus A321 in 1959. Impossible. I opened the oldest report. Captain deceased. Aircraft recovered without passengers. Recovered? Where? The location field had been blacked out. The next report. Passengers remained on board despite evacuation. The next. Crew recovered. No aircraft found. The next. Aircraft landed before takeoff. I stared at the sentence. Landed before takeoff. That made no sense. Then I noticed something worse. The captain listed on the 1999 report was Captain Wallace. The same Wallace I'd spoken to in the crew lounge. The report marked him as deceased. 26 years ago. Ground control transmitted again. Except, the voice was Ethan's. Not similar. Exactly Ethan's. Captain? I turned slowly. Ethan hadn't spoken. His headset microphone remained inches from his mouth. The radio continued. You shouldn't trust your co-pilot. The exact words Captain Wallace had warned me about. I looked at Ethan. His face had gone pale. That wasn't me. I know. Was that my voice? Yes. His breathing became uneven. I've heard that sentence before. So have I. When? I don't know. We both fell silent. How could you remember something that had never happened? A loud bang shook the aircraft. Not from outside. From below us. As though something enormous had struck the underside of the fuselage. The entire cockpit vibrated. Master caution illuminated. Then disappeared before either of us could acknowledge it. Engine indications remained normal. Hydraulics. Normal. Fuel. Normal. Electrical. Normal. No warning messages. No faults. Nothing. The airplane acted as though nothing had happened. But something had. Because outside, the runway lights had changed. Instead of white centerline lights, they glowed amber. Then red. Then blue. Not flashing. Flowing. Like liquid beneath the pavement. The lights seemed to move under the asphalt. Traveling toward us. Fast. Very fast. Melissa called again. This time she sounded like she was trying not to scream. Captain. What now? I checked 27 Alpha. You weren't supposed to. I know. I know. But what did you see? I don't know. The words came out broken. I looked directly at the seat. It was occupied. By who? I can't answer that. Why not? I don't remember. You just looked. I know. I remember walking there. I remember asking if they needed anything. I remember them answering. But now, I can't remember what I saw. She started crying. I think something took the memory. Before I could respond, she whispered something that froze my blood. I found another note. What does it say? Paper rustled. Then she read aloud. The passenger in 27A is not the problem. She stopped. There was another sentence beneath it. Her voice became almost inaudible. The empty seat is. I turned toward the cabin camera display. Every passenger remained seated. Perfectly still. Seat 27A was occupied. I could clearly see someone there. Head turned toward the window. Dark clothing. Average build. Nothing remarkable. Then I blinked. The seat was empty. Blink. Occupied. Blink. Empty. Occupied. Empty. Occupied. Not changing randomly. Changing every time I blinked. I stopped blinking. My eyes watered. The figure remained. Motionless. Then, without moving its body, its head slowly rotated toward the camera. Not naturally. Too far. Too smoothly. Until it faced directly into the lens. The camera feed immediately filled with static. The cockpit printer activated again. Another strip emerged. Only 5 words. Do not blink at 27A. I folded the paper without thinking. As if following instructions had become instinct. The aircraft clock changed again. 22:27. My wristwatch still read 22:22. 5-minute difference. Exactly 5. Never more. Never less. Almost as if the airplane was 5 minutes ahead of reality. Then Ethan quietly asked something I wish he hadn't. Captain. What? If the airplane thinks it's 5 minutes later. What if? He swallowed. We already took off? Neither of us answered. Because the view outside the windshield had changed. The terminal was gone. The taxiways were gone. The airport was gone. Ahead of us stretched an endless runway beneath the sky with no stars. Behind us, there was nothing at all. Not darkness. Not fog. Just absence. As if the world we'd left had been erased. Then the flight management computer chimed. A route modification had been received. Neither of us had requested one. The destination field, which had been blank since boarding, finally populated. Destination, home. Estimated arrival time. Unknown. Before I could process that, the throttles began advancing on their own. The engines roared toward takeoff power. My hands were still wrapped around them. I wasn't moving them. Neither was Ethan. Yet the airplane had made its decision. Flight 702 was departing. The engines surged to takeoff thrust. 90%. 95. And one stabilized exactly where it should for our weight. Except neither Ethan nor I had advanced the throttles. My hands were still resting on them. I could feel them moving beneath my palms. Not resisting me. Ignoring me. Every instinct from 12 years in commercial aviation took over. I grabbed the thrust levers and pulled them back. Nothing. They didn't budge. It felt like trying to move steel welded into place. Ethan! I'm trying! He wrapped both hands around the levers beside mine. Nothing. The engines continued accelerating. Outside, the runway centerline raced beneath us. Except, I never released the brakes. The parking brake handle was still set. The brake pressure gauge confirmed it. Hydraulic pressure remained normal. Yet somehow, the aircraft was rolling, accelerating, breaking the laws of physics as casually as crossing a painted line. The airspeed indicator came alive. 40 knots. 60. 80. "ICAS is clean," Ethan shouted. "No brake warnings. No tire warnings. No anti-skid faults." Everything insisted this was a perfectly normal takeoff. It wasn't. I looked outside. The runway lights had changed again. They no longer marked pavement. They outlined something enormous beneath it, like the glowing skeleton of a creature buried under concrete. Each centerline light formed part of an impossibly long spine stretching toward the horizon. For one horrifying second, I thought the runway wasn't built on the ground. I thought it had been built on something. V1. The automated call-out echoed through the cockpit. Neither of us had entered takeoff data. There should have been no call-outs. "Rotate." The control column pulled gently against my hands. The airplane wanted to fly. I resisted. With every ounce of strength I had. The nose lifted anyway. The main wheels left the runway. And the moment they did, Denver disappeared. There wasn't any transition. No climb through clouds. No turbulence. No flash of light. One blink. That was all. One blink. And the airport no longer existed. Below us stretched an endless landscape of black mountains illuminated by a moon far too large to belong to Earth. It hung low over the horizon, close enough to reveal details. Except, it wasn't the moon. It had rings. Thin, pale rings that shimmered silently through the darkness. No stars surrounded it. No constellations. Just that impossible celestial body watching us from above. The navigation display spun wildly. Our GPS position vanished. Latitude and longitude became long strings of question marks. The flight management system flashed. Position unknown. Then, position unavailable. Then, position not permitted. I had never seen those words in any Boeing system. Because they don't exist. The radio burst to life. "Flight 702. At last. A controller. A real one. If anyone can hear me, do not climb above flight level 410. His voice was distorted by static. Panicked. Like he'd been transmitting for hours. "We lost 3 aircraft already." My finger hit the transmit switch instantly. "This is 702. Identify yourself." Static. Then, "They're copying our voices now." The transmission ended. Immediately another controller answered. Calm. Professional. Almost cheerful. 702, ignore previous transmission. Continue climb. Everything is normal. The two voices overlapped. One begging us not to climb. The other insisting everything was fine. Then both frequencies died simultaneously. The seatbelt sign illuminated again. This time, none of us had touched it. Melissa called immediately. "Captain? What? The passengers. What about them?" They all stood up. I froze. "What?" "Every single passenger. At exactly the same second. Even the elderly. Even the child. They're standing perfectly still. Facing forward. They aren't speaking. They're just..." She stopped. "What?" "They're listening." "To what?" Silence. Then, "I can't hear it anymore." I switched on the cabin camera. Rows upon rows of passengers stood motionless. Hands at their sides. Heads slightly tilted. As if listening to someone standing at the front of the aircraft. But there was no one there. Except seat 27A remained occupied. That passenger hadn't stood. He, or she, or whatever occupied the seat, remained perfectly still. The only seated figure aboard. Everyone else faced forward. Toward the cockpit. Toward us. Then, every passenger turned simultaneously. Not toward the cockpit. Toward seat 27A. 182 heads rotating in perfect synchronization. Not a second apart. Not gradually. Instantly. Like pages turning in the same book. The cabin camera feed froze. Then shut off. A chime sounded. The cockpit door keypad. Someone had entered the emergency access code. Impossible. Only crew members knew it. 5 seconds. The display counted down automatically. 4, 3, 2. I hit the deny switch. The countdown reset. Relief washed over me. Then it began again. 5, 4, 3. Someone outside entered the code a second time. Melissa's voice came over the interphone. I didn't touch the keypad. I know. So who did? Before I could answer, another voice cut across the line. Mine. Perfectly duplicated. Melissa. Open the door. Her breathing stopped. Captain? I didn't say that. The duplicate continued. It's okay. I've already landed. The interphone went dead. Ethan slowly removed his headset. What? He looked physically ill. Do you hear that? I don't hear anything. His eyes widened. You don't? No. There are. He swallowed. There are people talking. Where? The engine noise. I stared at him. The engines. They sound like voices. He pressed both hands over his ears. They're saying names. Whose names? I don't know. But. His face drained of color. They know mine. The master caution chimed again. This time a new message appeared. Cabin pressure normal. Normal? That wasn't a caution. That was reassurance. Aircraft don't reassure pilots. Systems report failures. They don't tell you what's okay. Another message appeared. Doors secure. Then another. Passengers awake. I felt something cold crawl up my spine. The airplane wasn't reporting system status anymore. It was reporting observation. As if something inside the aircraft were monitoring the people instead of the machinery. The cockpit printer activated for the third time since takeoff. Longer this time. Nearly an entire page. I tore it free. It wasn't weather. Not maintenance. Not dispatch. It was a passenger manifest. Except, every passenger had today's boarding time. Every passenger had today's seat assignment. Every passenger had today's destination. Except one. Seat 27A. No name. No boarding pass. No age. No gender. Just one line. Passenger since, unknown. Below that. Another line. Crew remaining before replacement, 2. I read it twice. Replacement? Ethan leaned over my shoulder. What does that mean? I didn't answer. Because I already feared I knew. Then the cockpit door rattled violently. Not someone trying to force it. Someone knocking. 3 slow knocks. Exactly the same rhythm as before. A child's voice whispered through the reinforced door. Captain. Long pause. You forgot me. My pulse hammered in my ears. The voice continued. You always forget. Always. Not this time. Always. As though we'd done this before. Again. And again. And again. Then came one final sentence. One that made every earlier anomaly suddenly feel much, much smaller. Last time. You opened the door. The cockpit fell completely silent. Not because the engine stopped. Not because the radios died. Because every other sound disappeared. The constant airflow. The electrical hum. The faint vibration that every pilot feels through the seat. Gone. The engine still indicated 92% N1. Fuel flow remained steady. Cabin altitude was normal. Every instrument insisted we were flying at 39,000 feet. But the airplane no longer felt like it was moving. It felt parked. As if the world outside had stopped instead. Neither Ethan nor I spoke for nearly a minute. Professional pilots are trained to compartmentalize. Fly the airplane. Navigate. Communicate. In that order. Except there was no navigation anymore. No one trustworthy to communicate with. And I was no longer convinced the airplane belonged to us. The only thing left was habit. I reached for the flight controls. The yoke felt different. Not heavier. Older. The leather wrapping beneath my hands had become cracked. The trim wheel beside my seat showed patches of rust. A faded scratch across the glare shield hadn't been there before. Neither had the cigarette burn near the circuit breaker panel. Boeing stopped allowing cockpit smoking decades ago. I looked over at Ethan. His face had gone white. Captain. Yeah? My side looks different. I leaned toward his panel. His instruments weren't digital anymore. Round analog gauges filled half the panel. Artificial horizon. Vertical speed. Old-style altimeter. Like something out of a 1960s airliner. I blinked. The glass cockpit returned. Everything normal again. What the hell? You saw it? Yeah. He slowly nodded. I thought I was losing my mind. So did I. The cabin called. Not through the interphone. Through the cockpit speakers. The PA system had activated itself. Melissa's voice echoed behind us. Captain. Then another Melissa answered. I'm here. Then another. I'm still here. Another. Please don't answer. Another. I opened the door. The overlapping voices multiplied. 5. 10. 20. Every version of Melissa speaking over one another. Some crying. Some whispering. Some screaming. One laughed. Only one. And it sounded exactly like the woman I'd flown with for months. Then every voice stopped at once. Only one remained. Very softly. This isn't our first flight. The cockpit printer came alive again. This time it didn't stop. Page after page spilled onto the floor. Incident reports. Maintenance logs. Crew evaluations. Every document carried Flight 702. Every year. Every decade. I grabbed one at random. Incident date, October 14, 1988. Aircraft type, Boeing 727. Captain. My name. Impossible. I hadn't even been born. Another report. Douglas DC-6. Same captain. Same employee number. Another. Aircraft listed as a model that doesn't even exist yet. Same captain. Same signature. My signature. Exactly as I signed my flight paperwork. The ink matched every curve. Every hesitation. Every flourish. My hand began shaking. This is fake. Ethan didn't answer. He was staring at another page. His lips moved silently. Finally, he looked up. My employee photo. What? They're using my employee photo. He handed me the report. The picture wasn't current. It wasn't old. It was older. Wrinkles lined his face. Gray hair. One eye clouded over. But it was unquestionably Ethan. The employment date read 2044. The cockpit door access light illuminated again. This time the keypad accepted the emergency code. 5-second countdown. 4. 3. I hit deny. Nothing happened. The countdown continued. 2. 1. The door unlocked. Click. Every muscle in my body tightened. The handle slowly rotated. Exactly halfway. Then stopped. Someone stood outside. Patiently waiting. Not forcing entry. Just waiting for permission. The tiny peephole camera beside the door activated automatically. Neither of us touched it. The monitor displayed the forward galley. Empty. No one stood outside. Yet the handle continued turning. Then we heard footsteps. Not outside. Inside the cockpit. Behind our seats. Soft. Measured. 1, 2, 3. I turned instantly. Nothing. Empty jump seat. Empty rear bulkhead. No one. The footsteps continued anyway, stopping directly between our seats. I could hear breathing, close enough to fog my neck. Ethan whispered, "Don't turn around again." I already did. No. His eyes stayed locked behind me. I mean, don't do it again. Something in his expression told me he wasn't looking at empty space anymore. The weather radar suddenly painted a perfect green circle. Exactly like Rule 4. A flawless storm with an empty center. Except, we weren't flying near weather. The entire outside air temperature remained clear. No precipitation. No cloud returns. Yet the radar displayed a circular cell nearly 300 miles wide. Its center was perfectly black. Around the edge, tiny returns blinked. Not weather echoes. Targets. Hundreds of them. Moving. Each one following our exact heading. Maintaining perfect formation. What are those? Ethan zoomed the display. The targets arranged themselves into words. Not coordinates. Not symbols. Words. Turn back. The display flickered. The words changed. Too late. Then every target disappeared. The flight attendant emergency code flashed on the cockpit display. Melissa again. I answered immediately. Her voice sounded exhausted. Captain. I'm here. I counted them. Counted who? The passengers. And? There are 184. I felt my stomach twist. The manifest says 183. I know. I counted 4 times. She inhaled shakily. I think someone boarded after takeoff. I switched back to the cabin camera. Rows of silent passengers. Exactly as before. Then movement. Seat 14C. A man slowly stood. He walked into the aisle. No one reacted. He walked toward the rear galley. Halfway there, he disappeared. Not faded. Not obscured. Gone. The camera continued recording an empty aisle. Melissa came back over the interphone almost immediately. Captain? Yeah? I just watched a passenger disappear. I saw it. No. You saw someone leave. I watched him vanish. There was a difference. I knew exactly what she meant. The first officer's navigation display suddenly went black. Letters slowly appeared across it. Not generated by any avionics system. As though someone were typing directly onto the screen. Ethan. Pause. You never survived this flight. He stared without blinking. The text changed. But he did. Every arrow on the screen rotated toward me. At the same time, my own display lit up with a different message. Only one of you is original. Neither of us spoke. Neither of us even looked at each other. Because Captain Wallace's warning came back with horrifying clarity. When that happens, don't trust your co-pilot. For the first time since we met. I wondered whether Ethan was thinking the exact same thing about me. And then the cockpit voice recorder began playing back a conversation. Not from 5 minutes ago. Not from takeoff. From a flight that hadn't happened yet. My own voice filled the cockpit. Calm. Defeated. If anyone finds this recording, don't let me land. The recording continued. My voice was unmistakable. Every inflection. Every pause. Every breath. If anyone finds this recording, don't let me land. Static swallowed the rest. Then another sentence emerged. Quieter. As if I were speaking through clenched teeth. I made the wrong choice. The playback clicked off. The cockpit voice recorder display returned to normal, as though nothing had happened. Neither Ethan nor I moved. Finally, he asked the question we'd both been avoiding. Captain, what if that really was you? I didn't answer. Because I couldn't. Some part of me already believed it was. A tone sounded from the flight management computer. Not an alert. A notification. The route had changed again. No waypoint names. No airways. Just a single destination. Arrival window open. Distance remaining. 0:19. Not 19 nautical miles. 19 minutes. The airplane wasn't calculating distance anymore. It was counting down. The cockpit door opened. Not all the way. Just enough for a hand to slip through. Gray sleeve. Old-fashioned pilot's uniform. Different from ours. Older. The fabric looked decades out of date. The hand rested on the edge of the door without pushing it farther. No rings. Weathered skin. A gold captain's stripe. 3 fingers. Not 5. 3. It slowly withdrew. The door clicked shut again. Neither of us had spoken. Neither of us had breathed. The cockpit camera replayed the last 30 seconds automatically. The doorway had never opened. Then Melissa screamed. Not frightened. Agonized. Raw. The interphone activated by itself. Captain? What happened? I found the service records. What? The galley compartment. There's another storage bay. I've never seen it before. Melissa. I think. Paper rustled. I found every cabin log. Every flight. They've been keeping them. Keeping what? Us. Silence. Then she whispered. There are photographs. My pulse quickened. Photographs of what? Crews. Every crew. Going back almost 80 years. So? They're all. She stopped. What? They're all us. The blood drained from my face. No. I'm looking at them. Captain. I can see you. Standing next to airplanes that hadn't been invented. Her breathing became ragged. I can see Ethan. Older. Younger. In uniforms from different decades. You're smiling. You both always look tired. Then, very quietly. There's one picture where you're both children. I felt something break inside my certainty. Not panic. Not terror. Identity. For 12 years I'd trusted my memory more than anything. Pilots have to. Memory backs up procedure when instruments fail. Now, every memory I possessed suddenly felt borrowed. The printer activated again. 1 page. Heavy cardstock. Employee identification. My photograph. My employee number. Date of hire. April 3, 1947. Expiration date. Never. Ethan grabbed the card. This is impossible. He flipped it over. There was handwriting on the back. Not printed. Written. In blue ink. You accepted the job long before you were born. The airplane banked gently left. Neither of us touched the controls. Outside. The impossible moon disappeared behind clouds. For the first time since takeoff. We saw lights. A city. Stretching farther than the horizon. Millions of lights. No roads. No highways. No moving traffic. Just endless buildings. Every skyscraper identical. Every window illuminated. Nothing moved. No aircraft. No weather. No signs of life. Just a silent city waiting beneath us. The navigation display labeled it with a single word. Transfer. Then the chaos erupted. Traffic. 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 Red diamonds flooded the display. Hundreds. No. Thousands. Aircraft surrounded us. Same altitude. Same heading. Same speed. None appeared outside the windows. Only on the instruments. Every target carried the same call sign. FL 702. Thousands of Flight 702s. Flying together. One after another. Above us. Below us. Beside us. Like reflections in a hall of mirrors. One suddenly transmitted over guard frequency. "This is Flight 702. Another interrupted. "No. I'm Flight 702. Another. "Don't answer him." Another. "He isn't your captain." Voices multiplied until the frequency became an ocean of overlapping crews. Some crying. Some praying. Some calmly reading checklists. One repeated the same sentence over and over. "We landed. We landed. We landed." Another screamed. "We never left." The transponder changed itself. Code 7500. Hijacking. Before I could reset it. Radio failure. General emergency. Then, a code I'd never seen before. 0000. Every display flickered. A new message appeared across every screen. Identity verification required. The cockpit door unlocked again. This time, it swung fully open. No one stood outside. The cabin lights had dimmed to a dull amber. Every passenger remained standing. Every one facing forward. Except Seat 27A. The passenger was gone. The seat was empty. Melissa stood in the aisle halfway down the cabin. Frozen. Not moving. Not blinking. Her eyes were fixed on the empty seat. I unbuckled instinctively. Ethan grabbed my arm. "What are you doing?" "I have to help her." "No. She's alive." "Captain." He tightened his grip. "Look at her feet." I looked. Melissa wasn't standing on the floor. She was hovering. Only an inch. Maybe two. Barely enough to notice. But she wasn't touching the carpet. Neither were the passengers. 182 people. Standing just above the cabin floor. Perfectly still. Like puppets suspended by invisible strings. Then every head turned toward me. Not together. One after another. Starting from the back row. 32. 31. 30. 29. Each passenger rotating slowly until the wave reached the front. It took perhaps 15 seconds. 15 of the longest seconds of my life. Finally, Melissa turned too. She smiled. Not naturally. Too wide. Too patient. Then she spoke. "Except." The voice belonged to Captain Wallace. "You finally remembered." The lights went out. Complete darkness. For exactly 3 seconds. When emergency lighting activated. The cabin was empty. Every passenger gone. Melissa gone. The luggage remained. Open tray tables. Half-finished drinks. Children's toys. Blankets. Eyeglasses. 183 people had vanished without disturbing a single object. Only seat 27A was occupied again. The figure sat motionless. Facing the cockpit. Waiting. The cockpit voice recorder activated on its own once more. Not with my voice. With Captain Wallace's. Calm. Resigned. "If you're hearing this, you've reached the part they never told us." A pause. "They aren't transporting passengers." Another pause. "They're transporting pilots." Silence. Then the sentence that changed everything. "The people in the cabin are only there to teach us how to become the next crew." And for the first time since Flight 702 began, I realized the passengers had never been the cargo. We were. The sentence echoed through the cockpit long after the recorder fell silent. "The people in the cabin are only there to teach us how to become the next crew." Neither Ethan nor I spoke. Because once you hear something that perfectly explains dozens of impossible events, your brain doesn't reject it. It starts rearranging every memory around it. Suddenly, the quiet passengers, the missing crew, Captain Wallace, the photographs, the incident reports, the impossible employee records. They weren't separate mysteries anymore. They were all symptoms of one process. A process that had been repeating for decades. Or centuries. The cabin was still empty. except for seat 27A. I couldn't make out the passenger's face. The emergency lights cast long shadows through the aisle, leaving the figure in darkness. Motionless. Patient. Watching us. The cockpit door remained open. Cold air drifted in from the cabin. Except it wasn't air. It smelled like old paper, dust, rain, jet fuel, coffee. Every airport terminal I'd ever walked through. Every layover. Every overnight hotel. Every goodbye. Every arrival. It smelled like my entire career. As though the airplane itself had memories. The flight management computer chimed. New crew assignment available. A box appeared. Accept. Decline. Neither option had a cursor. Neither responded to button presses. Then the system selected accept by itself. A second screen appeared. Captain position, occupied. First officer position, occupied. Next available assignment, cabin. My blood ran cold. Cabin. Not captain. Not first officer. Cabin. I looked toward the empty rows. Empty. Except for 27A. Then another line appeared. Promotion available after one successful cycle. No. Ethan whispered. No, no, no. What? He pointed toward his side window. There was another airplane flying formation beside us. Close enough to see inside the cockpit. White fuselage. No markings. Its navigation lights blinked in perfect synchronization with ours. The aircraft looked identical. Same registration. Same weathering. Same dent near the cargo door. Like looking into a mirror. Except the cockpit crew wasn't us. It was older us. 20 years older. Gray hair. Deep lines beneath tired eyes. My older self slowly turned toward us. He didn't look surprised. He looked sorry. He lifted a laminated card against the side window. 3 words. Don't land here. Then the other airplane abruptly pitched upward. Straight up. Far beyond any aircraft's performance limits. No stall. No loss of speed. It climbed vertically until it disappeared into the darkness. The cast never issued a traffic warning. Seconds later, a bright white flash illuminated the clouds above. No explosion. Just erasure. As though the aircraft had been deleted. The cockpit printer screamed to life again. Not chattered. Screamed. Paper poured onto the floor faster than I could tear it away. Every page contained the same photograph. An airport terminal. Crowded. Passengers everywhere. Ordinary. Until I looked closer. Every face was mine. Thousands of versions of me. Different ages. Different uniforms. Different hairstyles. Different decades. Every one staring directly into the camera. Every one wearing the same exhausted expression. On the final page someone had circled one face in red ink. Written beneath it. This is the first one. The aircraft suddenly encountered turbulence. Violent. The kind that slams your shoulder against the cockpit window. Coffee splashed across the instrument panel. Loose checklists scattered through the cockpit. Then, it stopped instantly. Perfectly smooth. Outside. The city was gone. We were over an ocean. Black. Mirror-like. No waves. No reflection. Just endless still water. Floating above the surface. Were hundreds of runway approach light systems. Not connected to land. Just lights. Stretching into nothing. Each one ended at an invisible runway suspended over the water. Airliners approached them from every direction. Different decades. Different designs. DC-3s. 707s. 727s. 737s. Aircraft I'd only seen in museums. Some burned. Some missing wings. Some perfectly intact. Every one lined up to land. None ever reached the runway. Each disappeared seconds before touchdown. Not crashed. disappeared. Another immediately took its place. Endlessly. Like an assembly line. Then I noticed something horrifying. Every aircraft had the same flight number. The weather radar painted another perfect circle. Only this time, the empty center contained a single return. One target. Exactly our speed. Exactly our altitude. Exactly our heading. It wasn't ahead of us. It wasn't behind us. It occupied our exact position. The collision warning should have been constant. Instead, the airplane treated it as normal. The target label slowly resolved into text. Original. Then it vanished. The public address system clicked. No one had pressed it. A calm female voice filled the aircraft. Welcome, crew. Not passengers. Crew. You have nearly completed orientation. Orientation. Like this had been training all along. Please prepare for transfer. The seatbelt sign illuminated. The no smoking sign illuminated. The fasten seatbelt chime sounded 3 times. Exactly like every commercial flight I'd ever operated. The announcement continued. Your previous memories will be archived. Archived. Replacement memories will be issued after arrival. I looked at Ethan. He looked back at me. For the first time since departure. Neither of us doubted the other. Whatever this thing was, it wanted us questioning each other. Because together, we still had a chance. Alone, we didn't. Melissa's voice suddenly burst through the cockpit speakers. Real. Terrified. Captain? Melissa! I found the old briefing room. What briefing room? It's inside the airplane. My heart skipped. What? Below the forward galley. There's a staircase. Captain. There are classrooms down here. My blood froze. What do you mean classrooms? Rows of desks. Projectors. Rule books. Hundreds of them. Her breathing became ragged. They've been training crews. For decades. No. She corrected herself. I don't think decades. I think forever. A metallic bang echoed behind her. Then voices. Dozens. Reciting together. Not chanting. Answering. Like students repeating after a teacher. Melissa whispered. They're saying the rules. The voices grew louder. Rule 1. Rule 2. Rule 3. Perfectly synchronized. Children's voices. Adult voices. Old men. Young women. Hundreds of them. Reciting operational procedures as though they had done it 1,000 times. Then, they reached Rule 7. For the first time. Someone actually said it. Melissa gasped. Oh God! The transmission cut off before I could hear the words. The cockpit shook violently. Not turbulence. Impact. Something had landed on the roof of the airplane. Heavy. Slow footsteps echoed above us. Metal groaned under impossible weight. One step. Another. Another. Whatever walked across the fuselage was larger than the aircraft itself. It stopped directly above the cockpit. Then, a shadow slowly spread across the windshield, blocking the impossible moon, blocking the stars, blocking everything. 2 enormous shapes appeared where eyes should have been. Not glowing. Not reflecting. Simply watching. The windshield icing sensors activated. Except the outside temperature was positive. A thin layer of frost began creeping inward. Across the inside of the cockpit glass. Letters formed naturally within the ice. Not random cracks. Words. You were never hired. A second line appeared beneath it. You were selected. Then a third. The sentence Captain Wallace had been too afraid to tell anyone. Redacted Airlines isn't an airline. The frost continued spreading until the final message appeared across the entire windshield. The words remained frozen across the windshield. It is where pilots go when something else finishes flying them. Then they melted. Not from heat. From inside the glass. The letters bled downward like rain running in reverse, leaving the windshield perfectly clear again. Outside, the impossible sky was gone. There was only cloud. Ordinary gray cloud. For the first time since takeoff, it looked almost normal. Almost. The altimeter still read flight level 390. The engines purred smoothly. Fuel calculations were exactly where they should have been. Every instrument insisted we were back in controlled airspace. After everything we'd seen, that was somehow the most frightening thing of all. The radio crackled. Flight 702. A real controller. Calm. Professional. Radar contact. I nearly laughed. Ethan, you hearing this? He nodded slowly. I think so. The controller continued. You've been out of communication for 7 minutes. 7. Only 7? It felt like we'd been gone for days. Maybe years. I keyed the microphone. Center, this is 702. No response. I tried again. We've experienced. The controller interrupted before I finished. Captain? Not our call sign. Listen carefully. His voice dropped almost to a whisper. You only get one landing. Static. Then another voice forced its way onto the frequency. Not a controller. Captain Wallace. You finally know what this place is. The first controller shouted over him. Don't answer. Wallace continued anyway. They aren't replacing crews. They're replacing reality. Every display in the cockpit went black. One by one. The primary flight display. The navigation display. The engine indication system. The standby instruments. Even the analog magnetic compass above the windshield slowly spun until the card blurred into a solid white circle. The only thing still glowing was the aircraft clock. 22:27. 5 minutes ahead. Always 5 minutes ahead. It had never changed. No matter what happened around us. The airplane was always living 5 minutes into the future. Then I understood. Not completely. Just enough. Ethan. What? The clock. What about it? It isn't wrong. He stared at me. It's counting down. To what? Our replacement. The cabin lights flickered. The emergency lighting shut off. Normal cabin lighting returned. Warm. Comfortable. Exactly as it would be on any overnight flight. Then, people began reappearing. Not all at once. Row by row. Passengers faded back into existence. A businessman reading a newspaper. A college student asleep against the window. The mother comforting her daughter. The elderly couple holding hands. Every movement resumed naturally. As though nothing had happened. Seat 27A remained occupied. But now, I could finally see the passenger's face. It was mine. Not older. Not younger. Exactly as I looked tonight. Same uniform. Same wedding ring. Same tiny scar beneath my chin from Air Force survival training. He smiled. Not maliciously. Sympathetically. Like someone watching a younger version of himself make an unavoidable mistake. Then he stood. Without opening the cockpit door. He stepped through it. Not breaking it. Passing through it. Like walking through fog. He entered the cockpit. And sat down in the empty jump seat. Neither Ethan nor I moved. The other me folded his hands. I remember this part. His voice was calm. Almost kind. You talk. You argue. You think you can change it. I found my own voice. What are you? He smiled faintly. I asked the same question. Were you? Yes. The original? He looked out the windshield. I don't think there was ever an original. The cockpit voice recorder clicked. Recording. The duplicate nodded toward it. Good. It has to hear this. I stared at him. It? You still think there's only one thing listening? The airplane suddenly descended. Violently. 3,000 feet. Exactly as it had in my memory. Except. This time I watched my own hands. They never touched the controls. Neither did Ethan. The autopilot disconnected itself. The yoke moved forward. The aircraft entered a smooth, controlled descent. No warnings. No overspeed. No turbulence. Just acceptance. Then the terrain display illuminated. Not mountains. Not terrain. A runway. Floating in empty darkness. Runway lights stretched forever. Thousands of feet long. On both sides of the runway. Aircraft. Hundreds of them. Parked wingtip to wingtip. Every model ever built. DC-3s. Constellations. 707s. 747s. Airbuses. Boeings. Aircraft from airlines that had gone bankrupt decades ago. Military transports. Experimental prototypes. Some with engines running. Some abandoned. Every cockpit occupied. Every crew watching us arrive. None moved. None waved. They simply watched. Waiting. The duplicate finally spoke again. Do you know why they pay so well? I didn't answer. Because everyone accepts the job. He laughed quietly. Not for the money. For the second chance. What second chance? He looked directly into my eyes. The one you don't remember asking for. Fragments flashed through my head. A rain-soaked highway. Blinding headlights. Metal twisting. Someone screaming my name. An impact. Then. Nothing. I gasped. No. The duplicate nodded sadly. You died. Another memory. An Air Force cockpit. Warning alarms. Fire. Another impact. Different. Contradictory. Then another. A heart attack in a hotel room. Then another. A small Cessna spinning toward trees. Impossible. Hundreds of deaths. Hundreds of endings. All of them felt equally real. I grabbed my head. Which one happened? The duplicate whispered. Exactly. The runway filled the windshield. Autoland armed itself. Neither Ethan nor I selected it. There wasn't even an Autoland system installed on this aircraft. Yet the annunciation glowed green. Land 3. The duplicate stood. If you land, what happens? You become the crew waiting for the next flight. If I don't? He looked toward the side window. You become one of the airplanes. I followed his gaze. The endless rows of parked aircraft. Their cockpit windows. Every crew staring silently outward. Waiting forever. Neither flying. Nor landing. Just waiting. Ethan suddenly slammed the autopilot disconnect bar. Nothing. He pulled the circuit breakers. Nothing. He grabbed the control column with both hands. I've got it! The airplane ignored him. I joined him. 2 trained pilots pulling with everything they had. No response. Then, the duplicate quietly reached forward. With one finger. He pressed the TO/GA switch. Takeoff/go around. The Autoland disconnected instantly. Every caution light illuminated. The airplane lurched violently upward. The runway fell away beneath us. The duplicate looked at me one last time. There. You finally made a different choice. For the first time since Flight 702 began. Something changed. The impossible runway disappeared. The endless parked aircraft vanished. The duplicate smiled. Not with relief. With fear. Oh, he whispered. I was hoping that wouldn't work. Before I could ask what he meant, every window in the cockpit shattered outward simultaneously. Not inward. Outward. Into a sky that no longer contained Earth. No atmosphere. No stars. Only countless aircraft. Flying in every direction. Each one carrying a Flight 702. And every one had just turned toward us. There were thousands of them. No. Not thousands. Enough that counting stopped meaning anything. Every direction I looked, there was another aircraft. Some were only a few hundred feet away. Others drifted like distant stars. Boeings, Airbuses, DC-3s, Constellations, 727s, aircraft that had never entered commercial service, aircraft with propellers that turned without engines, aircraft with wings that bent at impossible angles. Every one carried the same flight number, 702. Every one had just changed course toward us. Not aggressively. Deliberately. Like birds responding to a silent command. No alarms sounded. No TCAS. No collision warnings. Because, according to every instrument still functioning, there was nothing there. Only Ethan and I could see them. Or, only whatever remained of us. The cockpit windows should have been gone after exploding outward. Instead, invisible barriers held the wind back. The air inside remained perfectly still. The temperature remained 72 degrees. Cabin pressure remained normal. The airplane behaved as though the windshield were still intact. Yet I could reach forward and touch empty space. Beyond it, the impossible sky. The duplicate version of me had vanished. Not faded. Not walked away. He simply wasn't in the jump seat anymore. The seatbelt he'd never worn still swayed gently, as if someone had stood up only seconds before. Then the cockpit voice recorder clicked. Recording. A familiar tone. Someone was speaking. It wasn't me. It wasn't Ethan. It wasn't Captain Wallace. It was the instructor from my first day of training. Calm. Patient. Almost disappointed. You've completed orientation. A pause. We did not expect deviation. Another pause. Please remain calm while history updates. Every aircraft outside banked simultaneously. Thousands of wings tilting in perfect synchronization. The sight should have been beautiful. Instead, it felt like watching a school of predators circling prey. Then the radios came alive. Not one frequency. All of them. Every aviation frequency I'd ever heard. Tower. Ground. Approach. Center. Guard. Company. Emergency. Military. Oceanic. All transmitting at once. But no one spoke English. No one spoke any language I recognized. It sounded like standard aviation phraseology stripped of meaning. Readbacks without clearances. Acknowledgments without instructions. Endless communication between crews that no longer remembered where they were going. Then, one voice broke through the noise. Melissa. Soft. Weak. Captain. I'm sorry. I grabbed the microphone. Melissa! No answer. Only silence. Then, one final transmission. I remembered Rule 7. The cockpit printer activated one last time. One sheet. Nothing else. I pulled it free. There was only a single sentence. Rule 7. My heart pounded. Finally. After everything. The rule they'd hidden from every crew. I turned the page over. On the back, in handwriting I instantly recognized as my own, were 8 words. Never finished the flight. Someone else already did. That was it. No explanation. No procedure. Just that. I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because every rule suddenly made sense. They weren't written to save the passengers. They weren't written to protect the crew. They were written to delay the inevitable. Every checklist. Every exception. Every strange instruction. They weren't escape plans. They were speed bumps. Someone, somewhere, had discovered that certain choices bought you a little more time. Nothing more. The aircraft clock changed for the first time since departure. 22:27 became 22:28. Exactly 1 minute later than it should have. Ethan saw it too. Captain. It slipped. No. I shook my head. We did. Outside. The nearest Flight 702 drew alongside us. Its cockpit sat only 20 feet away. This time I didn't look away. There was no point. Inside sat Captain Wallace. Older than I'd ever seen him. His uniform looked almost gray with age. His beard had grown long. His eyes carried the exhaustion of someone who had measured time differently for far too long. He looked directly at me, then slowly shook his head. Not in warning. In apology. Behind him, the first officer's seat was occupied. By me. Older. Thin. Hair almost completely white. I was staring straight ahead. Hands resting lightly on the controls. Not moving. Not blinking. As though I had been sitting there for centuries. Wallace raised one finger, pointing past me, toward the cabin. I turned. For the first time since the passengers disappeared, I heard movement. Not footsteps. Breathing. 183 people inhaling together. The cabin lights brightened. Every passenger was back. Exactly where they'd been during boarding. Reading. Sleeping. Watching movies. The little girl hugged her stuffed rabbit. The businessman adjusted his tie. The elderly couple smiled at one another. No one looked frightened. No one remembered. Except, every passenger slowly looked up from whatever they were doing. Every single pair of eyes met mine. Not hostile. Not afraid. Expectant. Like they were waiting for me to make an announcement. Then, together, they smiled. Not unnaturally. Not monstrously. Sadly. As if every one of them already knew the ending. A soft chime echoed through the cabin. The one passengers hear just before the captain makes an arrival announcement. Without touching anything. The PA microphone in my hand illuminated. Automatically. Ready. The speakers clicked. Then, my own voice filled the cabin. Not the voice of the man sitting in the cockpit. Another version. Older. Calmer. Ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. Pause. On behalf of REDACTED Airlines, I'd like to thank you for flying with us again. Again. The words settled over the cabin like a funeral bell. No passenger reacted. None seemed surprised. They'd heard it before. Maybe hundreds of times. Maybe forever. The impossible aircraft surrounding us stopped. Every one of them. Motionless. Waiting. Watching. Then, one after another, their landing lights switched off. Darkness spread across the sky until only our airplane remained illuminated. The instructor's voice returned one final time. You have demonstrated unacceptable variance. A pause. Correction postponed. Another pause. We'll try again. Everything went white. Not bright. Empty. No cockpit. No airplane. No sound. Just white. Then, the smell of fresh coffee. The hum of fluorescent lights. Someone laughing down the hallway. I blinked. I was sitting in a crew briefing room. A gray binder rested in front of me. Operational exceptions. Across the table sat pilots I somehow recognized without ever meeting them. A man reached the front of the room. Plain suit. No name tag. No smile. Exactly as I'd remembered. Or, exactly as I was about to remember. He opened the binder. You already know how to fly airplanes. The room became perfectly silent. What we're teaching you is how to survive this one. For just a fraction of a second, something inside me screamed to stand up. To run. To warn everyone. To burn the building down if I had to. Instead, I heard myself ask the same question another pilot had asked years before. What is Rule 7? The instructor looked directly into my eyes. And this time, he smiled. A genuine smile. Small. Satisfied. Excellent. He closed the binder. It seems you're remembering faster. If you're hearing this. If this recording somehow survived when everything else didn't. I need you to do one thing. The next time you book a flight, look at your boarding pass before you walk down the jet bridge. If the gate number wasn't on the departure board a few minutes earlier, leave. If the airplane doesn't have a logo until you look away, leave. If the captain welcomes you aboard, Listen carefully. If he sounds like he's trying to remember the words instead of reading them, leave. And if your ticket ever says Flight 702, don't tell anyone. Don't ask for a refund. Don't argue with the gate agent. Just turn around. Because by the time anyone believes your story, the crew will already be waiting for you. Again.